Hi, everyone. Welcome to 7 SEL strategies to increase and maintain positive behavior in the classroom. It's good that you're all here with us today. Thank you for taking some time on this week after Thanksgiving and the drudge between the holidays. So thanks for spending some time with us. I am Danielle Boheis. I'll be your host today. I'll share a little bit of my background in the next slide, but really what I want to go over is what we're going to focus our time on today. And really what we're going to be learning about are some strategies that are helpful in understanding your students so you can focus more on the learning aspect of things and less on behaviors. And I would love to share a brief overview of what we're going to go over. So we're going to focus a little bit on brain science first. And really that's going to hone in how that knowledge will help us build positive relationships with our students. So we first need to understand the basis, and then we'll dive into our 7 strategies to help you connect with your students on a deeper level so that you can keep them in the reward state of mind. And we'll talk about that as we go through this today. So welcome. So I left private education after 6 years in the classroom. I taught 4th and 5th grade students, but I always wanted to teach middle school science. That's what my degree was in, and that's where my passion was. So after 6 years, I left my 4th and 5th graders and had this great opportunity to teach middle school science in an urban school classroom. And I had a great experience in my middle school. And I went there, I was really excited. I was ready to teach all this great content, but what I didn't know was what it would take to connect with 150 students that came trickling through my room every week. I had great relationships in my past with my students, but I had a class of 25, right? It's a little bit different when you think about how you're going to develop relationships with students you don't spend all day with. And so this was a learning point for me. And so what you see in this photo was a little bit of what was happening in my classroom, though I would argue my classroom was a little more chaotic. I had students who weren't engaged. I had students walking around. I had set expectations, so I thought, but my classroom was not where I needed it to be in those first few weeks and even months into the school year. Students, like I said, students weren't engaged. I have behaviors, tons of behaviors. I was spending time calling parents and asking them for tips and tricks for their students and having students call home. It was a huge mess. So I didn't know what to do. I thought I was planning effectively and delivering engaging content and creating opportunities so my students can learn. But what I had somehow forgotten was the need to build those strong relationships. And that was really the foundation I was missing. Again, really great at it with 25 kids. Really not doing well when I got to that 150. So I didn't have a whole day to spend with my kids. And that was my biggest struggle that year. So what that took from me, for me to stop and self-reflect was, what do I need to do to reach my students? And it wasn't a very easy process for me to go through that year. But I want to share with you some strategies that you're going to be able to use to connect with your students in a deeper way. And really what we're going to focus on is this concept of threats and rewards. So before we get into those strategies, which I promise we'll get to in a little bit, I want to talk to you about why these strategies will work and the brain science behind it. So if you know, we have a prefrontal cortex, we have an amygdala, we have processing parts of our brain, and our brains are constantly scanning our environments to determine if what we are experiencing is either threatening to us or rewarding to us. And if it's threatening, what happens is your prefrontal cortex actually stops processing in a really methodical way, right? That all goes away and you just start to react. And so that often will elicit an amygdala hijack. That's when we feel like we're a little bit out of control and we just react the way that we have in the past, whether that was good or bad. And so that's what we want to make sure we keep away from our students. We want those experiences to be minimized in our classrooms. And what we really want is for the reward status of the brain to start producing dopamine so that students are in a great state of mind. When we're in that state of mind, things feel good. We're connecting with people. We're being recognized positively. There's lots of positive things going on. And that's really the basis for how we interact with our students. And this happens constantly in our brains all the time, up to 5 times a second. So we want to make sure that we can recognize some of the triggers, which we'll talk about in the next few slides, in our students so that we can measure our reactions with our students, understand where they're coming from, and apply the social emotional strategies that I'm going to share in just a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is use this acronym. It's called SCARF, and it's a brain-based model for how we collaborate with others. And it was developed by David Rock. And this model will help us really identify the 5 most common types of ways that people either feel threatened or rewarded. And we can kind of flip the script there, right? We can identify the fact that this might be a trigger for us or a student. And then we can say, okay, what can we do to provide some ways that students will feel a positive interaction from this? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use this model to help you identify triggers in students to minimize those threats and maximize those rewards. So the first one is status. And this is really about your sense of importance in relation to others around you. And a lot of times it feels like, and then when the teacher shows up in the classroom, we're the authority figure, and we are the ones that set the precedent. So I'm challenging you to think about how to create a safe space for students who might have this trigger. I, as an adult, have this trigger. I'm very well aware of it now that I've done my research and understanding what this means for me. But really, we want to create a safe space to share and to model those expectations for students. And so when you feel like a student is feeling threatened, think about if it could be because they're not included in a decision, or they are threatened by the fact that you are telling them what to do. There's lots of great ways to approach that by including them in decisions and creating classroom expectations that involve input from all the different students in our classrooms. So keep that in mind as you're going through these strategies as well. The next one is certainty. I think we all have a little bit of this, especially after the last 2 years, but it's really about the need for clarity and the ability to make those predictions about the future. So when we walk into our school buildings as students, do you have a known routine and set expectations in your classroom, in your building, whatever part of the building you're going to? And are these things predictable? That is going to create, those are going to create norms that can help students feel completely at peace so that they can come into your room, be in a reward state of mind, and allow their brains to process appropriately as you teach content. So make sure that those things are happening in your classroom. The next thing that we're going to talk about is autonomy. And I think the most important thing is about sense of control. We all need a little bit of control in our lives. And when students are empowered to have a certain level of decision-making in your classroom, they're in that reward state of mind. And that's what we want to do. We want to minimize those threats. So things like providing choices on where they can work in the classroom, if there's music on. I know a lot of teachers will use classical music, or how they complete a project. I know there's really cool menu boards out there I used to use when I taught in the classroom and did project-based learning. But really, it's all about providing students an opportunity to have some autonomy in the learning process. Lots of great ways to do that. Keep them in that reward state of mind. The next thing is relatedness. And I think as educators, we do a really great job of this, mostly in the beginning of the year, right? We focus a lot on our sense of connection and security with others. We try to create that sense of community in our classroom. We build classroom contracts. We do lots of great things, but we need to continue that throughout the year. So don't forget about providing students opportunities to connect with you as the teacher and share things about yourselves as you go through the school year, but also in connection with other students. Provide weekly exposure to students to make sure that they are feeling connected to their community members as well. And the last one is fairness, where we're really just trying to create an opportunity for each student to be successful and engaged. And that looks a little different depending on a student's needs, but we really want them to be able to participate in whatever way they feel comfortable, whether that's sharing or connecting in a public or private space, meaning maybe it's in a tool or on a piece of paper rather than sharing something out loud, but making sure we're allowing all students to access the activities and the expectations that we are setting for our classroom. So we're going to really reference these as we go through the 7 strategies that I'm going to share. And really, it's all about increasing that positive behavior, increasing that dopamine in your brain, and allowing students to feel as they are in a safe space in order for that learning process to happen. So as you go through these, you'll be able to start to connect some of those SCARF acronyms or triggers that we've identified, but then being able to say, hey, this is a really great positive way to go through this process. So the first thing is about sharing about yourself, right? I think we often forget that we are seen as the teacher, as the adult, and we need to make sure that we increase students' reward state of mind, that dopamine. And if we're sharing about ourselves, it provides an opportunity for students to practice some of those things, like relating to you and connecting you, seeing you as a person, not just as an authority figure. I remember that book that I've read to my own children, My Teacher Sleeps at School. That is how some students still see us. It's hilarious to see them outside of school at the grocery store because they just don't think that we do normal things sometimes. So humanize yourself, make sure that they can understand that you have really great intentions and really are a person as well. This is a great tool that we use to be able to share about ourselves. And then we provide students an opportunity to share about themselves in this very same way. It's called the UMAP. And it's really about focusing on your uniqueness and what you bring to the table, not only for the things that are really great, like what I'm grateful for, or my family, or some of the things that I love, but really about how I assimilate goals. Like, what are my goals for this year, right? I'm working toward things as well. And then what's going on in my life that's not always easy, because normalizing that conversation is going to be really important when we try to relate to students, so they know that we too are human and we have things that we struggle with each day. So not only does this help us become more accessible to students, but it really creates a safe space for them right away, instantly, right? When we're vulnerable, it's really easy for them to relate to us in different ways. So make sure that you're having, these conversations with students. I know in the past, I've done it with note cards that I often collected. I asked students to share things about them. I filed them away, and oftentimes I didn't look at them unless I really needed to. So make sure you're being transparent with them and tracking how they're doing socially, emotionally throughout the year. This is just a different tool to help you do that. The next thing is modeling expectations. And I think we do a great job of doing that when we're setting up an activity in class or a science lab. But really what I'm talking about is modeling the expectations of how to share and relate to someone, right? And I think as adults, sometimes we don't know how to relate to others the best, and we're going to need to model that to our students. I think it can feel very threatening for a student to come into our classroom and to participate in some sharing activities about themselves when they don't know how to make a connection with another person. So sharing some examples with your students will help expand their thinking. If you model that first and then you allow them to go and practice, that allows them to develop those important skills that they need in life, right? It's not just about school, it's about life. So it's also important to talk about how to respect other people's views and teaching them that it's a beautiful thing that everyone thinks a little bit differently, but let's hear what they have to say, connect to it in some way, and ask questions and be curious, right? So those are all important things to become more socially aware to build positive relationships. And ultimately, this can help them handle conflict more appropriately as well. So think about that as you're going through things and model those things throughout the year, not just in team building activities. Lots of opportunity for teachable moments. The next thing that we're going to talk about is really recognizing students for who they are and how they show up to us, right? It's really, really important to help promote their positive self-worth and helping them develop that strong character, that we see them for who they are coming to us as, and forgetting about what's happened in the past. I think that we can get really caught up depending on what type of school we're in, right? And if students have been in the building before or what we know about them, but provide them an opportunity for a fresh start, right? I think that was the most important thing that I learned as an educator is not necessarily listening to all of the things that have happened with a student or having their reputation follow them as they go. Ask them questions about what they value. How do they like to be recognized? What are they interested in? And again, I'll show you a photo of our software tool that really helps us understand students from their own perspective. And I think that's something that we really need to focus on. We're not hearing it from other teachers or administrators or counselors. We're hearing it from the student, right? This is student authored. And so sharing something like their favorites or a quote that resonates with them or an image that's really important to them that maybe have defined parts of their life is really important to understand and value them for who they are. And we can use these tiles of information to connect to them, right, with our own experiences, as well as helping students connect to each other and making those connection points. Finding commonalities is going to be really important to, and allowing yourselves to just be vulnerable and have those conversations. Doesn't have to start deep, right? It's just about connecting. If kids like certain sports teams, if kids like certain thing that they do outside of school, if they like debate or theater, it's just about connection, right? We want to make sure we're doing that. The next one is normalize asking for help. And I think this is a really powerful tool that we should be doing with our students on a daily basis. Empowering your students to share about their well-being. And I'm, not talking about good news, right? So we did good news in the classroom. We shared good news every single day before every single class. And I think it is a fantastic practice. But what we are missing there is we often don't provide students an outlet to share things that they may need help processing, right? Or that they may need some advice on. Really good about positive things in the classroom. I think we're a little bit lacking in that. And so, I had a student, and this story feels very much real to me still, like I can still feel the emotions. I had a 7th grade boy who came in my classroom in August. He was just a shyer 7th grade boy. He would come up to my desk at dismissal time and maybe tell me a joke, and we had a pretty good relationship. But like in November, he came up to me and he had spoken about his dad before, but never really, I had picked up on part of his story that his dad wasn't around. And so I said, Abner, what happened to your dad? Is he around? Does he just live out of town, live out of the house? He said, no, my dad was actually deported in July, and I've had to help my mom do all these things, and she works. And I was absolutely devastated. He didn't really know. He was a little socially awkward. He didn't really know how to say this before that time. We ended up adopting him for holidays and his family, and we were able to help them and give them some other services that our school provided. But really, without me having a conversation with that student, I wouldn't have known that. So if we can normalize asking for help, this little what keeps me up at night is really just a way on the UMAP that we ask students to share about what's on their mind and providing a safe space to do it, right? It doesn't have to be a verbal thing. It can be something that happens behind a screen where some kids are more comfortable. And it's less about sharing like deep, dark secrets and invading in someone's privacy, but more about normalizing the fact that every single person has something to put here. The teachers and the counselors and the students who are using this tool are really passionate about this because it really has helped provide some transparency there and some normalization. So I just urge you to really be able to open up your classroom and listen to your students in a way that's really meaningful for them and can help them process some things that might be difficult. Practicing positive self-talk. It's really difficult task for most people, I think specifically adults. And some of our kids are not understanding how they show up in a really positive way. And that conscience in their minds might be telling them, not some great things. And really that negative self-talk often comes from feeling threatened or scared in certain situations. So again, lower the threat, maximize that reward status, and allow you yourself to model this positive self-talk. So what I would do in my classroom is when I was teaching a new concept, or when we're doing a lab for the first time, or something was happening, I would model how I was talking to myself or my thought process when I was doing something really hard. And that just helps students see that you can reframe the way you're talking to yourself. And then they were able to start to apply that to their own thinking when they were like, this is really hard, miss, or I can't do this. That helped them reframe it because I could refer back to that moment and they could do that. So focus on how you can address a negative feeling when a student's feeling that, and then help them repeat that positive phrase in their mind. So for example, when I feel nervous, a lot of the times I'll say, here's the reason why I know I can do this. I've done this, I've done that. I believe in myself and I know I can do it because I've done something similar. So help students frame that positive mind, help them do that positive self-talk, and that will help create that positive image and that confidence that we want to see in students. So there's two more. So create a strong sense of belonging. And I think that, again, we do a really great job of this in our classrooms in the beginning of the year. And, I think at this time of year, I was always really good at it because we were starting to drag a little bit and we needed a little pick-me-up. So I do some team building activities. But really what it's important here is creating that sense of belonging to know that every student is needed in that process, right? When we recognize the importance of a student and how they shape our classroom community or our school community, we need all the students. We need everyone who's unique and different and brings their different talents and strengths. So get your students involved, right? Get your students involved in working with different groups of students within your room. I went to a training a few years back and it was phenomenal. And it was really all about how to get students working with different groups of people within your classroom very frequently. So we would use 2 or 3 tactics that I learned in each class. And it was all about setting some expectations about how students worked in groups and what they needed to do, and if they had a job when they were in these groups. And as we developed those expectations and norms in my classroom, it became really easy for me to put students in different groups. They all had an assigned role. They all knew what to do. And then it was a very quick way to get students to do a turn and talk or different activities to get them collaborating with each other. So practice that. Look up some strategies online. I know that once my students were able to do that, we had so much positivity and innovation in my classroom, and it really just increased the excitement and the learning environment. So, and they really liked it. They didn't dread it so much after that. I know middle schoolers and some upper elementary students too can get really iffy about working with different groups of people outside their friend group, but it really did work well once we established that norm in my classroom. The last one is all about empathy. And applying empathy can be really difficult when you don't know a student's situation. I had that expectation as I didn't know my students coming into that middle school science room. I didn't know their backgrounds. I didn't know anything about them. I was like, oh, these are students. They're going to be great. They're going to come into my classroom. They're going to sit and they're going to learn. And then I had a whole slew of behavior issues. I had kids interrupting. I had all kinds of things. So I had to start approaching those situations with curiosity and asking students what might be going on. What were the behaviors actually telling me that the students' needs were, right? So when we can apply that empathy, when we can get to know students a little bit more, when we know what keeps them up at night, that's what's actually going to shift our mindset into addressing the child and their need, and not so much just the behavior and throwing a consequence at them, because that doesn't necessarily work, right? We need some changes to be put in place. And that really allows us to support in such more meaningful way. And then oftentimes when we address those, the behavior starts to diminish, right? We start to learn a little bit more about our students. So applying empathy in all situations is going to be easier to do at some points, but I promise it's definitely worth it. And you learn things about students in ways that you can support them that just mean the world to them. So back to my middle school classroom, the disaster that it was when I first started. I looked back and it took a ton of self-reflection, a lot of tears. I honestly wanted to quit. I asked my husband if I could quit multiple times because it was so difficult and so hard in changing myself and learning about the things that I needed to do to control the situation. And a lot of intentionality, learning about students, applying some of the brain science, applying these SEL strategies was literally life-changing for my classroom. But it was the best time of my life. It was the most crucial learning point I ever had in education. And that first year was full struggle. But after that year, students would come to my room, and again, not perfect, but they came in, they were engaged, they gave effort, they contributed. Students who didn't have any ability to work in other classrooms would come into my classroom to get work done. So I took that as a huge compliment in the fact that the work I put in to their social emotional well-being and understanding them at a human level really allowed them to have a greater learning experience. So my hope is that you would apply some of these strategies immediately, right? You don't have to go and choose 150 students. That's really overwhelming. Start with 1 or 2 kids in your classroom that you're having a difficult time with. And I know it's happening because I hear it from all my teacher friends, but choose one and start doing something, share something about yourself. And a student might not reply right away. It's not always easy, but continue and persevere. And I promise you it will be worth it in the end. So just start by something small. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for attending. I don't know if there are any questions or comments. I know I have a couple people that were looking at the chat. So if you have any questions, my email is on here. That QR code will get you to a couple different downloads. So we have part of the presentation that I gave, the 7 SEL strategies are on that download, and some tips that go along with them. And then what you'll find are some bell ringer activities, really quick questions that you can use with your students to connect with them. They're like 5-minute activities. You can put them in groups. You can talk in a, you can think, pair, share, whatever you want to do, but use them from now until the winter break. It's a perfect opportunity to get to know your students before they go away for a couple of weeks. So again, my contact info, thank you so much for everything, showing up today and listening. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks so much. Oh, I have one question. So self-reflection can be really hard. Do you have tips for coaching teachers who might not want to change what they are doing? It is really hard. I think that by having an experience yourself and saying, okay, here's what's happening, and sharing the way, I guess, authentically like I did and how it changed my whole classroom environment, I would honestly look to a mentor for that. We do have some self-reflection strategies in our company that we use for organizations that I'd be happy to send along to you, Teresa, but it really is an exercise that can be very difficult for teachers. And I think if they see someone else and the experience that they have doing it, or if others are sharing, that's going to be a lot more powerful than saying, hey, you really need to take a look at yourself. This isn't working. So thanks for that question. Any other questions? Thank you, Teresa. Awesome. Well, everyone, it was wonderful again to have you on today. Please, if you have any other questions or need any other resources from us, please reach out. Otherwise, it was good to have you all on here, and have a great rest of your week.